The dawn light filtered through the stained glass windows of the Red Keep, painting the hall in a mosaic of colored shapes. King Robert Baratheon stood in the throne room, flanked by Ned Stark and several gold cloaks, each man looking tired yet resolved. The battles of the past months, first against the White Walkers, then the internal struggles with Tywin Lannister, had left the realm weary. Yet, no one in attendance bore illusions that peace would last. The looming threat from Essos Varos and his growing alliance with Daenerys Targaryen cast a deep shadow over any sense of victory. Throughout the morning, carriages bearing the sigils of the great and lesser houses of Westeros began to arrive at King's Landing. The lords and ladies who stepped forth did so with caution. Rumors spoke of dragons returning to Essos in force and a mysterious sorcerer who commanded legions of Valyrian troops. If the realm was to face another cataclysm, it was wise to prepare thoroughly. Ned Stark, clad in the muted grays and browns of the north, walked the length of the throne room to greet the arriving dignitaries. He offered each house a measured courtesy, though his eyes never lost their hint of worry. The need for alliances had grown urgent. Beside him, Renly Baratheon hovered, wearing the vibrant greens of the Stormlands, trying to charm each new arrival with a smile or a jest. Stannis, standing stoic near a column, gave only brief acknowledgments. His presence was enough to remind everyone of the gravity at hand. When the hall had filled, with banners of various houses fluttering in the torchlight, Robert ascended the Iron Throne. He sat, warhammer resting against the steel steps, surveying the gathered crowd. The lords of the Riverlands, the Reach, the Vale, and even a delegation from Dorne were present. It was a rare assembly, reminiscent of war councils from years past. Ned stepped forward. "My lords, we have much to discuss. Many of you have heard rumors of Varos, the so-called Valyrian sorcerer, and his alliance with Daenerys Targaryen. It is said they gather strength in Essos, forging an army with dragons at their command." A murmur went through the crowd. Many lords exchanged nervous glances. Tales of dragons were not easily dismissed, especially after the recent sightings of colossal beasts that had aided in defeating the White Walkers. Robert cleared his throat, his voice booming across the chamber. "We owe them, Varos and Daenerys, some debt for their role in smashing the undead. But their ambitions don't end there. Word from across the narrow sea warns of them uniting the free cities under a new Valyrian banner. Already, Yunkai and Meereen stand in their crosshairs. And once Essos is unified, who's to say Westeros won't be next?" Lord Randall Tarley, representing part of the Reach, spoke up. "If they can unify Essos, they'll have wealth, soldiers, and dragons. That trifecta is unmatched. We cannot let them catch us unprepared." A low rumble of agreement went through the court. Mace Tyrell, nodding solemnly, added, "The Reach stands ready, your grace, but we must act with caution. We cannot storm Essos ourselves, not without inviting chaos at home." Ned raised a hand. "No one speaks of storming Essos. We only wish to prepare and to keep lines of information open. Lord Varys." He glanced around, noticing the spymaster absent for the moment, "has been tasked with sending envoys and informants to every corner of the free cities. We must know Varos's next moves." At the mention of the spymaster, a few lords let their dissatisfaction show. The complexities of having a master of whispers poking into foreign matters made them uneasy, but no one dared question the necessity. Renly stepped forward, offering a conciliatory smile. "We ask for unity, my lords. To remain vigilant, keep your levies at the ready, and share any news of suspicious sails or foreigners in your ports. If Varos and Daenerys do decide to look westward, we'll need every shield, every sword." Across the room, Edmure Tully and his sister Lisa Arryn whispered among themselves. The threat of a Targaryen returning to conquer was not lost on the lords paramount. Memories of the last Targaryen victory were woven into the land's history. This time, however, the Targaryens came bolstered by a powerful sorcerer and unknown magics. In the end, the assembled lords agreed to keep their forces near their seats of power but on high alert. Plans for communication and rapid mobilization were laid out. Letters would be sent out daily, ensuring every corner of the realm could respond if a crisis arose. With that consensus, the gathering ended, and the lords dispersed to their quarters. After the day's council, Robert and Ned convened in a smaller solar, joined by Stannis, Renly, and Ser Loras Tyrell. The topic was delicate: communication with the free cities themselves. If Varys and Daenerys were forging alliances among them, Westeros would need to offer warnings or perhaps even deals to those who might stand opposed. Robert paced by a wide window, looking down at the bustling city. "Damn this all," he muttered half to himself. "I fought a rebellion to free the realm from Targaryens, and now they return with an army of sorcerers and dragons. They say they're saving the world, but once that's done, what's to stop them from crossing the sea?" Ned stood near a table, quill in hand, drafts of letters scattered around him. "We must be careful how we phrase our warnings, Robert. The free cities are not our allies, nor do they trust us. Many of them prefer neutrality, Bravos especially. If we seem desperate or hostile, they may side with Daenerys out of self-interest." Stannis, arms folded, nodded curtly. "Bravos is the key. Their Iron Bank finances half the world's wars. If Daenerys and Varys secure Bravos' gold, they could raise legions beyond counting." Renly tapped a finger on a letter draft. "We should warn them of Varys' ambition. Speak of the dangers of uniting under a single powerful leader who wields both magic and dragons. Emphasize that this threatens the autonomy the free cities value." Ser Loras Tyrell, standing near a wall sconce, regarded each man carefully. "It may be prudent to also remind them of the Targaryen legacy. Some of these cities remember the dragon lords of old. Fear might serve as a motivator, though it's a delicate tool." Robert turned from the window, dragging a hand across his beard. "Fear, yes, but not panic. We don't want them rushing into Daenerys' arms for protection. We want them on edge, wary, so they'll close their ports to her forces, refuse them supplies." Ned set about writing. The words needed to be chosen with care. Underscore to the esteemed leaders of the free cities, the 7 kingdoms of Westeros send greetings and tidings of concern. News travels fast across the narrow sea. A sorcerer named Varys and Daenerys Targaryen gather dragons and legions in Essos, with designs that may extend far beyond the Slaver's Bay. We advise vigilance. Our understanding is that these forces aim to unify the continent, to forge an empire reminiscent of old Valyria. While Westeros has no desire to interfere in the free cities' autonomy, we caution you that alliance with these powers may lead to subjugation rather than liberation. Recall the histories of Valyrian dragonlords who once dominated much of the known world. We do not wish to see such a chapter repeated. We propose mutual vigilance. Our envoys are prepared to discuss shared security concerns. The realm has endured enough turmoil. Let us not see further conflagration sweep across your cities and our shores. In good faith, Robert of House Baratheon, first of his name, King of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Eddard Stark, Lord Paramount of the North, Hand of the King. Underscore. Renly read the draft over Ned's shoulder, nodding slightly. It's cautious, non-threatening, but clear about the potential danger. Stannis' lips pressed into a thin line. It may not be enough to sway them, but it's a start. Robert sighed, crossing his arms. We can't do better than caution. Let the cities decide whether they prefer freedom or the so-called divine cleansing Varys preaches. Ned carefully sealed the letter, affixing the royal seal. Ravens would depart by evening, sailing across the narrow sea, carrying Westeros' warnings to Bravos, Pentos, Lys, Myr, and beyond. The question remained whether those city-states would heed such counsel. The following days found King's Landing in a state of heightened activity. Soldiers drilled in the yards, blacksmiths toiled night and day forging new weapons, and the lords who had gathered maintained a constant schedule of councils, feasts, and private discussions. Whispers filled the corridors. Speculation about Daenerys' next move, concern over Varys' rumored sorceries, and the uncertain fate of Lord Tywin Lannister in the dungeons. Robert, feeling the strain, often retreated to the training yard to vent his frustrations with a hammer and straw dummy. Ned, meanwhile, spent hours in the council chamber, poring over reports from every region. Stannis and Renly divided their duties. Stannis oversaw naval readiness at Blackwater Bay, while Renly worked to keep the lords content and supportive of Robert's stance. In one such meeting, the Great Hall hosted Lord Randall Tarley, Harry's SWIFT, and Ellery Vance, among others. These lords had expressed private concerns about keeping armies in King's Landing indefinitely. Resources were depleting, and their lands needed governance. Ned stood at the dais, addressing their complaints. "We understand the burden of maintaining forces here, my lords. But until we receive clear signs of Kevan Lannister's next move or any confirmation from the Free Cities, we must remain vigilant." Lord Tarley, ever pragmatic, inclined his head. "House Tarley respects duty, Lord Stark, but we cannot linger forever. My men need to return to the Reach for the harvest. If we lose the harvest, we risk famine in the winter." Ned offered a solemn nod. "A fair point. Perhaps we can rotate levies, ensuring each region maintains some presence here while allowing others to return home. King's Landing has seen enough chaos, and we do not wish to burden your lands more than necessary." The lords murmured agreement. This rotation would keep a significant force in the capital while preventing entire regions from collapsing. Meanwhile, the matter of Lord Tywin weighed heavily on everyone's minds. Though his official fate remained undecided, whispers circulated about possible outcomes: forced exile, a ransom for the Westerland's loyalty, or outright execution to send a message to any would-be rebels. In the dungeons beneath the Red Keep, Tywin remained stoic. Few approached him save for the guards who brought meals. But occasionally, Ned Stark visited, intent on gauging the prisoner's mindset. One afternoon, Ned descended the winding steps, the torches casting dancing shadows on the walls. He found Tywin seated on a low stool, reading a dusty tome the guards had allowed him, a courtesy rarely extended to prisoners. Tywin's eyes lifted as Ned approached, betraying neither gratitude nor hostility. "Lord Stark," he said, closing the book. "An unexpected visit." Ned inclined his head. "I've come to see if you have any response to the letters we've sent to Kevan." Tywin's expression tightened, though he remained composed. "I presume you threaten him with my head if he fails to disband any notion of rebellion." Ned offered no denial. "We offer the realm peace. If Kevan stands down, you may see a measure of leniency." Tywin's lips curled into a mirthless smile. "Leniency, such a generous word for a predicament I did not choose. My daughter's sins led us to this point, did they not?" Ned stared at the older man, his tone even. "You played your part, Lord Tywin. Do not pretend innocence." Tywin's gaze flickered, a hint of regret flashing in his eyes before the cold mask returned. "In this world, Lord Stark, we all play parts we'd rather not. But tell me, does your honor truly believe the realm benefits from my demise? Or is Robert's fury too blind to see beyond vengeance?" Ned hesitated, wrestling with his own sense of justice. "The realm has bled. My father, my sister, my brother, all died because of Targaryen madness. Yet we now face Targaryens once more, with a Valyrian sorcerer who might overshadow them all. Where does House Lannister stand, if you are freed?" Tywin exhaled, his composure unwavering. "House Lannister stands for itself, as always, but I am no friend to Daenerys or her savage ally. If you demand loyalty to the crown to fight that threat, we might find a common cause." Ned studied Tywin's face, weighing the truth of his words. "Time will tell, Lord Tywin. Until then, you remain here." He turned to leave, stopping at the iron door. "Pray Kevan sees reason. For your sake." As Ned departed, Tywin resumed his reading, though the faint lines of worry around his eyes betrayed the uncertainty he felt. Days later, the ravens dispatched to Braavos, Pentos, Tyrosh, and the other free cities returned, bearing responses that varied from polite caution to thinly veiled disinterest. Braavos replied with the most measured tone, offering assurances of neutrality but refusing to align against Daenerys and Varos without further evidence of threat. Pentos, under the influence of Illyrio Mopatus and possibly sympathetic to Targaryens, sent a letter praising peace but hinting at their unwillingness to antagonize dragon riders. Tyrosh expressed mild alarm at rumors of a Valyrian horde but insisted on waiting for more concrete signs of aggression. In a private council session, Robert, Ned, Stannis, and Renly pored over these letters. The mood was grim. "Damn them," Robert muttered. "They hedge their bets, hoping we or Daenerys come out on top. They won't act until someone forces their hand." Stannis spoke in his characteristic monotone. "They fear choosing the losing side. Their neutrality is a shield. But neutrality means they'll offer no port to us, nor to Daenerys, unless gold is exchanged." Renly shrugged. "Better neutrality than open support for her. We can work with that." Ned frowned, scanning Braavos' letter once more. "Braavos is the key to the Narrow Sea. If they remain neutral, we can keep some measure of peace on our eastern shores. But if Varos persuades them of some grand destiny, or if Daenerys claims the Targaryen debts, it could turn the tide against us." Robert slammed a fist on the table, rattling the parchments. "We keep watch on them, same as before. Let's not forget the real threat. The East is stirring, yes, but we're not helpless. We have armies. We have alliances. If Varos and Daenerys step onto Westerosi soil, we'll be ready." While Robert, Ned, and the council managed public policy and official letters, a series of private negotiations unfolded behind closed doors. Lesser lords and knights, each with their own agendas, came to King's Landing seeking favor or coin. Some offered intelligence, trade routes Varos might exploit, or potential alliances Daenerys might forge. Others came with pleas. A father wanting to confirm his son's loyalty in the face of rumored Targaryen infiltration. A minor house seeking extra gold to fortify their keep. Ned Stark found himself burdened by these hush-hush dealings. He spoke with Lord Glover, who confessed concerns about Ironborn activity in the northern seas. He met with House Royce of the Vale, who warned that the Vale's mountainous passes could become a strategic point if Daenerys sought to land near Gulltown. Each worry, each rumor, added to the tapestry of unrest. In one dimly lit solar, Ned also had an unexpected visitor. Ser Davos Seaworth, the knighted smuggler loyal to Stannis, entered quietly. He bowed, then spoke in hushed tones of Euron Greyjoy's demise and the Iron Islands' uncertain future. "They say the Ironborn might still gather under a new leader. The Sea Lords never rest easy, Lord Stark." Ned nodded, tapping his fingers on the table. "We can't afford another rebellion on our western coasts while we watch the east. Speak with Stannis. Ensure our fleets are prepared." Ser Davos left with a respectful bow, leaving Ned alone with his thoughts, grim as ever. To maintain morale among the lords still in King's Landing, Robert declared a great feast, held in the Red Keep's opulent banquet hall. It was a customary means of reminding everyone of the crown's power and hospitality. Despite the tensions, a sense of cautious celebration pervaded the hall, with tables overflowing with meats, fresh bread, and barrels of ale and wine. Ned, seated beside Robert at the high table, found little appetite for the lavish spread. His mind lingered on the threats abroad and the rumors swirling within. Occasionally, he cast an eye toward the seat meant for Tywin Lannister, long empty now, and wondered how Kevin would respond. The chatter of the lords, many half-drunken, formed a backdrop of noise that grated on his weary mind. Renly, ever the charmer, flitted between tables, regaling minor lords with stories of the heroic battle against the White Walkers. Stannis remained near the dais, nursing a single cup of wine, his expression dark as he observed the crowd. Ser Loras Tyrell mingled effortlessly, bridging conversation between the anxious houses and projecting a veneer of stability. Robert, in his element, roared laughter at half the jokes told and drank enough to fill a small cask. Yet, behind the jovial facade, a shrewdness had returned to his eyes. He could sense the lords' uncertainties, their whispered suspicions, and he noted each with the skill of a seasoned politician. At one point, Robert leaned toward Ned. "They're all waiting, you know. They want to see if Kevin surrenders. They want to see if Daenerys sails west. They want to see if we'll collapse under our own weight. It's a damned spectacle. Ned inclined his head, his tone measured. We must show them unwavering resolve. If the crown so much as wavers, half of these lords will ride home to fortify their castles, leaving us even weaker. Robert nodded, his hand tightening around his goblet. Aye, Varys and Daenerys might have postponed their gaze on Westeros, but they won't forget it. We must be ready. A fortnight passed with little direct news from Essos. The storm across the sea seemed to gather quietly, focusing on the rumored conquests of Yunkai and Meereen. Yet, tension in King's Landing remained high. Lords began to trickle out of the city, returning to their lands, though many key bannermen stayed to show solidarity, or to keep an eye on the crown. From the Royal Spymaster's network, fresh tidings arrived almost daily. Varys had departed for Old Valyria, leaving Daenerys and her advisors to handle the forging of alliances in Slaver's Bay. Word suggested that Yunkai was poised to fall, with the city's leaders in secret talks to surrender. The masters of Meereen, more stubborn, had begun bolstering their defenses, but the outcome seemed inevitable. Valyrian troops, Dothraki hordes, and dragons overshadowed any conventional force. Ned took these reports to Robert in private, each new dispatch adding to the realm's anxiety. They move swiftly, Ned observed, placing a scroll on the king's table. Yunkai hasn't fallen yet, but all signs point to a quick capitulation. The cities never withstood a proper siege. Robert rested his forehead in his palms. Gods, Ned, how many men will they have after that? If the entire Slaver's Bay is united, we're looking at tens of thousands plus dragons. And that's before they set foot in the free cities. Ned could offer. Unexpectedly, a raven arrived from the Westerlands, bearing the Lannister lion's sigil. The letter, written in Kevin Lannister's hand, reached Ned and Robert just after midday. Its contents were terse. To King Robert Baratheon and Lord Stark, Hand of the King, I have received your demands regarding my brother's fate. I urge caution. House Lannister does not bend to threats lightly, but we understand the realm's precarious situation. We will disband any rumor of rebellion if my brother is returned unharmed and guaranteed a fair trial, should trial be deemed necessary. Our banners remain loyal to the crown if given the respect owed to one of the great houses of Westeros. Signed, Kevin Lannister, Regent of Casterly Rock. Ned read the letter aloud to Robert in the secluded solar. The king listened intently, his expression growing conflicted. He sounds almost civil, Robert muttered. A fair trial, indeed. He wants to spare Tywin's neck while disclaiming any rebellion. Ned folded the parchment. It's better than a refusal. If Kevin truly disavows rebellion, we can avoid open war in the West. Robert grimaced, pacing the chamber. Tywin stands guilty of enough crimes, but truth be told, the realm can't handle another war. We need to keep all eyes on the East. Perhaps we can negotiate terms. Stannis, summoned for the discussion, glanced at the parchment. A trial could be arranged if it helps secure peace. But will Tywin accept judgment from a king he despises? Ned sighed. He may have no choice. Kevin's stepping in as a mediator. Let's see if a settlement can be reached. Robert nodded reluctantly. Draft a response, Ned. Offer Tywin a formal trial under the king's justice, with Kevin present to witness. If they comply, we hold him in captivity until that day. But if Kevin tries anything, Stannis finished the king's sentence grimly. We'll hang Tywin from the walls of the Red Keep. Thus, the strategy took shape. Another raven flew west, bearing a letter that carefully laid out the crown's terms. A suspended trial, indefinite captivity for Tywin under comfortable conditions, and a guarantee that if House Lannister truly disarmed and reaffirmed loyalty, Tywin's life would be spared. For now, a new concern soon emerged. Whispers from the dockside taverns in King's Landing. Sailors spoke of a fleet being assembled in secret, supposedly financed by a mysterious benefactor. According to rumor, this fleet would rival any navy in Westeros, perhaps even combining with Ironborn stragglers searching for a new master after Euron's downfall. Ned, meeting with Ser Davos and Admiral Redwine, pressed for details. Redwine reported that trade ships had vanished along the southern coasts, possibly commandeered for some unknown cause. Davos added, "It's said the Iron Bank might be involved, though that's unconfirmed." The possibility of a new fleet, not aligned with the crown, posed another threat to stability. If it fell under Daenerys or Varys' influence, Westeros would face a naval front as well. If it allied with rebellious lords, the realm could be split from within. Robert snarled at the reports, frustration boiling over. 7 hells. Must every damned threat converge at once? We can't let them gather a navy that could blockade King's Landing. Stannis, see to our ships. I want them patrolling from the Blackwater to the Stepstones. If any suspicious fleet appears, we burn it before it can land. Stannis agreed, leaving immediately to coordinate with the newly strengthened Royal Navy. With the memory of Euron Greyjoy's boldness fresh, no one dared underestimate the sea again. While Westeros scrambled, Daenerys Targaryen and her advisors advanced in Slaver's Bay. The news from captured Yunkai was all but certain. Surrender was imminent, and the city's gates stood poised to open. Within weeks, Meereen would face a siege or choose a more peaceful submission. Every victory would swell Daenerys' ranks, forging a formidable force to challenge even the combined might of Westeros. During Varys' absence, Daenerys held court in Yunkai, reorganizing the city's governance. Freedmen's councils replaced the old slaver oligarchy. The Dothraki roamed the outskirts, ensuring no escape for the masters. The Unsullied patrolled the streets. Valyrian soldiers enforced new laws, punishing any who clung to the chains of the old regime. From these precarious alliances, Daenerys gleaned resources and manpower. Messages were dispatched to the free cities, announcing that the Targaryen queen offered trade in return for neutrality or support. Word also spread that her ally, Varys, communed with the Lord of Light in the ruins of Old Valyria, preparing for a grand unveiling of power. Such rumors reached the ears of Braavos, Lys, Myr, and the rest, even as Robert's warnings arrived on the same ships. The free cities found themselves in the middle of competing visions. Westeros' caution versus Daenerys' promise of a new order. 3 more weeks passed before a raven arrived bearing Kevan Lannister's final reply. The letter was succinct and complied with the crown's terms, stating that Kevan had ordered all Lannister banners to stand down. He expected a formal trial for Tywin, with Kevan present to argue for his brother's innocence. If the trial was fair and Tywin's life preserved pending its outcome, Kevan would pledge the Westerlands' loyalty to King Robert. Ned, upon reading this to Robert, felt a measure of relief. We avoid war in the West for now. Perhaps we can unify the realm's resources to guard against the threat from Essos. Robert exhaled a grateful sigh. Aye, one problem solved, then. But Tywin's a cunning fox. We'll keep him guarded until the trial. Let him stew in our dungeons a bit longer. With that resolution, a precarious balance took shape. Westeros no longer teetered on the edge of civil war in the West, at least. The forces remained stationed around King's Landing, but the immediate threat of Lannister armies burning the Crownlands had abated. Seizing the opportunity, Ned Stark and Renly Baratheon took to rallying the realm's morale. Lords were encouraged to fortify their defenses against potential foreign invasion. The North prepared to send additional resources south, ensuring the capital had enough supplies. The Vale offered cavalry, training near the Blackwater to sharpen readiness. The Tyrells, still the realm's breadbasket, pledged extra grain shipments. In a great courtyard, Ned convened a meeting of knights and lords from across the kingdom. They discussed fortification lines, contingency plans for coastal raids, and supply routes that could be shifted if the narrow sea became contested. Each lord parted with a clearer sense of what might be asked of them if war came from beyond the horizon. Simultaneously, the crown financed improvements to the Royal Navy, spurred by Stannis' grim determination. Shipwrights worked tirelessly in the ports of King's Landing, Storm's End, and other loyal harbors, launching new galleys fitted for ramming or fast maneuvering. Robert demanded excellence, reminding them all how Euron Greyjoy once dared claim a place in his city. As these measures solidified, a sense of guarded optimism took root. Westeros, though battered, displayed unity unseen in years, unity forged by necessity and the looming threat. Despite the outward show of confidence, private doubts plagued Robert and Ned. Late at night, the two met in Robert's solar, accompanied only by candlelight and a pitcher of strong wine. Robert paced, restless, while Ned stood by the window, gazing at the moonlit silhouette of the city. "What if Varos brings the full might of Essos upon us?" Robert asked, his voice low. "Legions of freed slaves, Dothraki screamers, dragons older and bigger than Balerion. Gods, Ned. What do we do then?" Ned clasped his hands behind his back. "We stand as we always have. We gather every banner, call on every vow of fealty. We defend the coast, man the walls, and rely on the unity we've painstakingly built. If the realm stands as one, even dragons may hesitate." Robert's eyes flickered with uncertainty. "We rely on men who spent decades fighting each other. Will they truly stand together?" Ned's jaw tightened. "They will if they fear Varos and Daenerys more than they resent each other. We must keep their focus on that threat. Keep them aware of the risk to their lands, their families." Robert nodded, but his troubled gaze remained. "And if the threat never comes? If Daenerys conquers Essos and then finds peace? Will we have spent years in anxious readiness for nothing?" Ned let out a quiet breath. "That would be the best outcome, Robert, peace even if uneasy. But we can't gamble the realm on hope alone." A silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Each man knew the realm hung in the balance, uncertain whether to dread an inevitable invasion or hope the storms might pass them by. Across the sea in Pentos, news arrived of a hush-hush meeting between representatives of Daenerys Targaryen and the Prince of Pentos. The city's magisters had yet to decide their stance. Some claimed it was wise to side with the breaker of chains to avoid her wrath. Others insisted on neutrality. In Lys, rumors swirled that certain pleasure houses and wealthy oligarchs favored trading with Daenerys, seeing profit in forging ties with a new empire. Myr, known for its sells words and forges, received quiet inquiries about the cost of raising an army. Meanwhile, Braavos remained publicly neutral, though behind closed doors the Iron Bank's ledgers told a different story. Reports suggested large loans to unknown parties, prompting watchers from Westeros to suspect they financed either Varos or potential enemies of Varos. No one could be sure. As spring turned to early summer, King's Landing settled into a tense lull. Robert and Ned's letters to the free cities had been read and acknowledged, but no alliance formed nor enmity declared. Tywin Lannister languished in captivity, awaiting a trial that might never come if Kevin continued to show compliance. The realm's armies remained at the capital's doorstep, rotating in shifts as resources allowed. Ser Loras Tyrell, one afternoon, met with Ned in the courtyard. "Our men grow restless, Lord Stark. Many yearn to return home. If this tension drags on, morale may wane." Ned agreed, his voice weary. "We can't keep them here forever. We'll rotate more men home, keep enough for a deterrent." "It's a delicate balance, Ser Loras." Meanwhile, Stannis inspected the fleet, ensuring the new ships were near completion. He confided in Renly, "If Varos does come, we must rule the seas. We cannot let them land an army unopposed." Renly, for once, gave a genuine nod of agreement. "Just see to it no one tries to seize the crown while we're looking east." The realm held its breath as the days lengthened. Each dawn brought hope that no black-sailed fleet appeared on the horizon, that no dragon soared overhead with the sun behind it. Each dusk allowed lords to sleep with only half their worries. But the knowledge that Varos gathered power in Old Valyria, that Daenerys pressed on in Slaver's Bay, loomed large, an unseen tempest building across the sea. For now, Westeros remained vigilant, forging deals with lords, contacting the free cities, and preparing for what might come. Robert and Ned had done what they could. They had extended warnings, mustered allies, and stoked the fires of unity. Whether that unity would hold when faced with the fury of Valyria reborn was a question left for the future. Enduring a precarious peace, the men and women of the Seven Kingdoms carried on. Eyes trained on the eastern horizon, hearts pounding with the awareness that the next raven or the next sail could herald the greatest war the world had ever seen. A fragile peace settled over King's Landing. The city streets were calmer now that rumors of an imminent Western rebellion had been cooled by Kevan Lannister's promise to reign in his banners. But the populace remained uneasy. The threat from the east, Varys and Daenerys Targaryen, still loomed over every strategic discussion in the Red Keep. Under the scorching midday sun, Ned Stark paced through the halls leading to the Royal Solar. Each step echoed with a quiet determination. A missive from the Westerlands had arrived earlier in the day, confirming Kevan Lannister's tentative acceptance of the crown's terms. Yet no date had been set for a formal negotiation. Ned felt the urgency in every beat of his heart. Tywin Lannister still languished in the dungeons, and Kevan's compliance was their only hope to avoid further conflict in the west. In the spacious Solar, King Robert Baratheon stood by an open window. The warm breeze ruffled his dark hair as he gazed toward the city below. Through that window, he could see the masses of camped soldiers, bannermen from many regions, who had not yet returned to their homelands. Their presence was a constant reminder of the precarious alliance holding the realm together. Ned entered quietly, clearing his throat to announce his presence. Robert half-turned, letting out a long sigh. "Ned," he said, his voice tinged with weariness. "Any further word from Kevan?" Ned shook his head. "No direct word since his letter 3 days ago, Your Grace. He's agreed to stand down his forces, but not to a specific date for negotiation." Robert slammed a fist on the windowsill. "We gave him Tywin's life as a bargaining chip, didn't we? That ought to move him faster." Ned dipped his head. "It should, but Kevan is cautious. He likely wants assurances that Tywin won't be executed the moment he arrives." Robert grunted, turning to face Ned fully. "We have those terms in writing. A formal audience, with Kevan present, to argue for Tywin's release. If the West stands down, we hold the line and keep Tywin as a hostage for good behavior. Everyone wins. Why the delay?" Ned clasped his hands behind his back. "Perhaps Kevan needs time to quell any lingering unrest in the Westerlands. He might also wish to gauge the realm state, to see if we're truly prepared for war with Essos." Robert blew out a harsh breath. "We don't need another war on 2 fronts, Ned. If Varys or Daenerys cross the sea, we'll need every sword. Kevan must see reason soon." Ned inclined his head. "Agreed. I've dispatched messages to keep pressing him for a date. We'll see what response comes." Beyond the matter of Kevan, another concern weighed heavily on Ned's mind: Jon Snow and his involvement in Essos' affairs. While Jon's loyalty was not in question, the intelligence gleaned from spies suggested he was caught up in Varys' circles, shaping strategies, overseeing dragons, even forging uncertain bonds with Daenerys. The time had come to seek clarity from Jon himself. Late in the afternoon, Ned retreated to his private study. The chamber, with walls lined by modest tapestries and shelves of old chronicles, was a quiet place where he could think without interruption. He set a fresh parchment on a small wooden desk, dipped his quill in ink, and began to write. "Jon, I trust this letter finds you in good health, though these are uncertain times. Word has reached us of your presence in Essos, caught amidst the rising forces of Varys and Daenerys Targaryen. While I know your intentions are ever honorable, I cannot help but worry. The realm is on edge, and we cannot ignore the potential of these new alliances across the narrow sea. Your counsel is needed, Jon. Tell me what you see. What are their plans? Is there truth to the rumors of a grand conquest of Yunkai, of Meereen, and the forging of a new Valyrian empire? Our hope is to avert further bloodshed, but should Varys or Daenerys set their sights on Westeros, we must be prepared. The king and I both remember how nearly the realm was torn asunder by the White Walkers, and we wish to avoid another cataclysm. Write soon and be mindful of your safety. The path you walk is treacherous, but I trust in your honor. Eddard Stark, Hand of the King _" Ned read the letter thrice, ensuring each line conveyed both fatherly concern and political necessity. Satisfied, he placed it in a small scroll case and sealed it with the direwolf sigil of House Stark. Summoning a trusted Ravenkeeper, he handed over the message, instructing it be sent through reliable channels to Essos. If Jon was indeed among Daenerys' circle, or at least traveling under Varys' banner, the letter should find him. If not, no harm, Ned would continue searching. He only hoped Jon would reply swiftly, shedding light on the unfolding situation. Meanwhile, a different matter had arisen. Stannis Baratheon felt the call to secure the realm's finances. Ever frugal, he had insisted that if war was to come, Westeros needed sufficient gold to fund ships, fortifications, and a potential war machine. And so it was decided that Stannis would sail to Braavos to meet with the Iron Bank. 2 days after Ned's letter to Jon was sent, Stannis departed King's Landing aboard a war galley, accompanied by a small entourage. The ship's sails bore the flaming heart of his personal sigil, signifying his link to the Lord of Light, yet Stannis' primary focus remained on the realm's treasury, not on religious symbolism. The crossing was swift and uneventful. Upon arriving in Braavos, the harbor's bustle and the sight of the Titan looming over the sea greeted him. Braavos had long been a neutral power, priding itself on independence, commerce, and the might of its Iron Bank. In the austere halls of the Iron Bank, Stannis was received by a council of stern-faced bankers, each wearing fine robes and exuding the quiet confidence of those who controlled vast sums of wealth. Stannis, never one for honeyed words, greeted them with the courtesy expected of a king's envoy but wasted no time on pleasantries. "Westeros stands on the brink of another war," he stated plainly. "The crown must ensure the realm is ready if Daenerys Targaryen or her ally Varys cross the sea. This requires coin. I come to discuss terms." The lead banker, a tall, balding man with a measured tone, steepled his fingers. "The Iron Bank is aware of the turmoil in Slaver's Bay and the emergence of dragons once more. We note that House Baratheon, like House Targaryen before it, owes certain debts. We must ensure those debts are duly acknowledged if further funds are to be considered." Stannis' jaw tightened. "House Baratheon acknowledges all rightful debts. But we also expect the Iron Bank to see that an invasion by Varys and Daenerys threatens not just Westeros, but the entire trade network. If Essos unites under a single power, Braavos itself may face complications." The bankers exchanged guarded looks. The threat was not lost on them, but neutrality was their shield. "We trade with all, Lord Stannis," the lead banker replied. "Yet we have no intention of seeing a new Valyrian empire dictate terms of commerce or politics. The Iron Bank invests in stability." Stannis inclined his head. "Precisely, and stability demands we prepare. Will you lend us the gold we need to reinforce our fleets and fortify the coasts?" A silence settled as the bankers considered. Finally, one nodded. "A possibility if the crown offers collateral. Gold alone may not suffice. We want assurances of timely repayment. War is a costly affair." Stannis let out a slow breath, hiding his annoyance behind a stern expression. "Name your terms." Over the next several days, Stannis engaged in back-and-forth talks with the Iron Bank senior members. They haggled over interest rates, sureties, and the realm's capacity to repay. In the evenings, Stannis would retreat to his modest quarters in Braavos, penning reports to King Robert detailing the progress. One evening, a letter arrived from Ned Stark. It conveyed that Kevan Lannister had yet to finalize a date for his arrival in King's Landing, but seemed close to yielding. Tywin remained in the dungeons, calm but watchful. No word had come from Jon Snow or from Essos, though some ravens suggested that Yunkai was on the verge of surrender. Stannis wrote back, "Lord Stark, the Iron Bank is guarded in their dealings, but I sense they will lend us funds if we offer compelling guarantees. They fear Varys and Daenerys might impose heavy restrictions on trade if they conquer all of Essos. Braavos is willing to hedge against that outcome. Awaiting further instructions and any new developments regarding Kevan or Tywin. If necessary, I can return swiftly to the capital. Stannis Baratheon." Meanwhile, each day of negotiation wore on Stannis' patience. The bankers demanded more than he was willing to concede. Talk of partial control over certain crown revenues, potential claims to valuable Westerosi assets, or even a negotiated monopoly on certain goods. Stannis balked at these demands, reminding them that the realm was not for sale. Eventually, a compromise began to form. The Iron Bank would release a substantial loan to the crown, enough to fund naval expansion, strengthen garrisons, and ensure the living forces could match any foe from across the sea. In exchange, the crown pledged to repay over a lengthy schedule, with incremental shipments of gold and favored status for Braavosi ships in Westerosi ports. Stannis, while displeased at the concessions, recognized the necessity. War loomed, and gold would be the shield behind the swords. With the outlines of a deal set, the king's envoy in Braavos began drafting the final documents. Back in the capital, Ned Stark balanced new responsibilities with the old. A formal letter arrived from Kevan Lannister stating he would journey to King's Landing within 2 weeks. He wished to ensure the roads were safe and that no unfortunate accidents befell him en route. Ned, reading this aloud to Robert, drew a wry smile from the king. "He fears we'll have him killed," Robert mused. "As if that would help us. Let him come. We'll treat him fairly, so long as he behaves." Ned wrote back, promising safe passage and reiterating that Tywin's fate hung in the balance of the negotiations. The city prepared to host Kevan, ensuring spare quarters were readied and that the Gold Cloaks patrolled diligently to avoid any incident that could spark another war. Meanwhile, the morale of the gathered lords began to lift at the prospect of resolution with the Westerlands. If Kevan truly meant to keep the West quiet, that would free all eyes to turn to the distant horizon, where war or peace with Essos remained uncertain. In a meeting with the small council, Ned and Robert agreed that once Kevan arrived, they would offer a solemn oath. Tywin's life spared if the Lannisters remained loyal to the crown and provided men should Varys and Daenerys ever cross the narrow sea. Many wondered if Tywin himself, proud as he was, would accept such terms. The date approached. Under Ned's guidance, King's Landing organized a formal reception to ensure Kevan Lannister felt safe enough to attend. The Gold Cloaks were doubled on the roads from the Westerlands to the capital. Loyal bannermen along the route, Tarly men in the Reach, Clegane and lesser houses near the Crownlands, were instructed to keep watch for bandits or rebellious elements. In a sign of respect, a small honor guard would escort Kevan from the city gates to the Red Keep. This guard, commanded by Ser Barristan Selmy, promised impartiality, a show that the crown did not wish to provoke Kevan nor see him harmed. During this time, Robert grew restless, complaining to Ned about feasts, parades, and all the damned pageantry. Ned reminded him that diplomacy required such gestures. "This is how we avoid war, Your Grace," he said, to which Robert grumbled but ultimately acquiesced. In a private conversation, Ned confessed his lingering anxiety. "I fear that if Kevan senses weakness, or if Tywin stirs from his cell, the lion might rear its head again." Robert nodded gravely. "Then let's ensure Tywin remains collared. Once we have Kevan's sworn word, we can focus everything on the east." A fortnight after departing, Stannis returned from Braavos. He arrived at King's Landing near dusk, the sea breeze carrying him ashore. Uncharacteristically, Robert greeted him with a measure of warmth at the dock. The two brothers exchanged curt nods, no embraces, but something akin to understanding passed between them. In a hurried meeting of the small council, Stannis laid out the terms of the Iron Bank loan. The realm would receive a large sum of gold immediately, enough to bolster the Royal Navy, support the armies in the field, and even begin improvements on key fortresses. In return, the crown owed installments over many years, with certain trade privileges granted to Braavos. Though costly, the arrangement brought relief. The realm now had financial backing to face any war. Ser Loras Tyrell commented that it felt odd to rely on Braavosi coin, but Ned retorted that survival often required alliances beyond comfort. Robert, swirling a goblet of wine, exhaled. "One problem handled, then. We have gold. Enough to keep us from sinking if Daenerys or Varys cross that sea with dragons." Stannis added a cautionary note. "The bankers remain neutral for now, but if Varys or Daenerys offers them better terms, We risk losing their favor. We must appear strong and united, or the Iron Bank might shift allegiances. Ned nodded, acknowledging the precarious balance. A reminder that every step forward can lead to new dangers. A hush fell over King's Landing on the morning Kevan Lannister was to arrive. The city's gates opened at sunrise, and an honor guard of 12 knights, led by Ser Barristan Selmy, rode out to greet him. The path was lined with gold cloaks and banners bearing the crowned stag of House Baratheon. Citizens peered from windows and alleyways, curious about the fate of the great house that once overshadowed the throne. Kevan entered the city accompanied by a small retinue of Lannister men, only about 30 knights. They wore the crimson cloaks and golden lion sigils of the West, but each carried an air of caution. At every turn, Kevan studied the watchers, the soldiers, the looming walls. The memory of Tywin's imprisonment weighed on every thought. At the Red Keep's gates, Ned Stark waited with Renly and a number of courtiers. Kevan dismounted stiffly, inclining his head. "Lord Stark, I come under the banner of parley as agreed." Ned offered a measured bow. "Welcome to King's Landing, Lord Kevan. I trust your journey was uneventful." Kevan's eyes swept the yard, noting the assembled forces. "Uneventful, yes. Thank you for the escort. I trust my brother remains in good health." Ned gestured politely. "We will discuss all in due time. The king awaits you in the throne room." With that, a subtle tension rose, the sense that every word, every gesture carried significance. Kevan and his retinue were led through the corridors, the hush broken only by the echo of boots on stone. Curious courtiers peeked from behind pillars. Word traveled quickly. Kevan Lannister was here to negotiate Tywin's fate. The throne room gleamed with midday light streaming through tall windows. Robert Baratheon sat upon the Iron Throne, his broad frame weighted by the crown's responsibilities. Near his side stood Ned, watchful. Stannis lingered farther off, arms folded, while Renly took a position near the dais, projecting a friendly smile that did little to dispel the tension. Guards stood at key points, ensuring no treachery would mar this meeting. Kevan Lannister entered, his steps echoing. He bowed respectfully, though without servility. Robert wasted no time. "Lord Kevan," he began, his tone measured but bearing the authority of a king. "You come seeking your brother's release, I presume?" Kevan looked up, voice clear. "I do, your grace. House Lannister has stood down in the Westerlands, as promised. We have no intention of rebelling against the crown. I come to ensure Lord Tywin's safe return, under fair terms." Robert shifted on the throne. "And if we decide that Tywin's crimes demand a life in chains? The realm hasn't forgotten his many intrigues, least of all harboring treachery that nearly broke the peace." Kevan's jaw tightened, though he remained calm. "My brother deserves a fair hearing, your grace. If he is guilty, let the realm see justice done. But no one can deny he aided in our final fight against the threat from the north. House Lannister has provided men and gold to this realm consistently." Ned stepped forward. "A trial is what we offer, Lord Kevan. Public, before the king, with the support of the lords of the realm. Tywin will be allowed to speak in his defense, and you may speak for him as well." Kevan bowed his head. "I accept, provided the outcome is judged by the king and the hand with fairness." Robert leaned on one armrest, the warhammer's handle glinting beside him. "Aye, fairness indeed. If Tywin is found guilty of rebellion, he could face death. But if the West truly stands with the crown, and we see no further disloyalty, we might be lenient." Kevan's gaze flickered with relief. "That is all I ask. Tywin will abide by your ruling, and the West shall remain loyal. We have no wish to see the realm bleed again." Ned exchanged a glance with Robert, sensing that an agreement had been reached in principle. Robert cleared his throat. "Very well. We'll hold this trial in a fortnight's time, here in King's Landing. Tywin remains in our dungeons until then. If the West is still at peace, we'll honor your request." Kevan exhaled, tension loosening from his shoulders. "Thank you, your grace. You will see that House Lannister keeps faith." In that moment, a fragile accord was formed. The West's line was stilled, at least temporarily. The fate of Tywin Lannister, while not sealed, edged closer to a formal resolution. For the realm, it meant one more piece of security against an uncertain future. With Kevin's compliance and the looming trial date set, a wave of tentative relief spread across King's Landing. Soldiers who had been idling in the capital began to relax, though they still maintained readiness for any foreign threat. The streets buzzed with gossip, commoners speculating on whether Tywin would truly be freed or face the king's justice. Robert and Ned found themselves with a moment's respite in the royal solar. Robert, leaning back in a carved wooden chair, stared at the city's skyline. "We've managed to hold this realm together against all odds, Ned," he murmured. "White Walkers, Lannister conspiracies, threats from the east, and yet we're still standing." Ned nodded, though his eyes held a distant look. "We stand, yes, but we do so on thin ice. Varos gathers strength, Daenerys raises dragons, and the free cities remain uncertain. This is but a pause, Robert, not an end." The king let out a slow breath, raising a goblet of wine to his lips. "A pause is better than nothing. Gives us time to breathe, to prepare if the worst comes." Ned agreed quietly. "We should use this time well. Strengthen alliances, ensure the navy is ready, watch every raven from Essos. If war comes, we must meet it on our terms." High in the red keep's rookery, ravens fluttered, delivering letters across the seas and to the far corners of Westeros. Each message carried the same caution. Watch for any sign of Daenerys, Varos, or dragons in flight. Be vigilant against rumor. Prepare for the possibility that an invading force might come in weeks or months or years. And so the realm braced for storms yet unseen. Behind them lay the horrors of the dead, now a memory. Before them lay the might of an ascendant Valyrian dream, with the blood of Targaryens and the will of a sorcerer who communed with ancient powers. Yet for the moment, the realm took comfort in small victories. Stannis had secured funds from Braavos, Kevan had stilled the lions, and Tywin's impending trial offered a semblance of justice. Whether this justice would hold, or whether the fires of Essos would consume Westeros first, no one could say. Outside, the midday sun shone on the city. Children ran through winding streets, merchants hawked wares in busy markets, and soldiers shared laughs while sharpening swords. Life continued, as it always had, ignorant of the grand designs that shaped their fate. And in the hush of the royal solar, Robert and Ned sat in a rare moment of peace, each man quietly aware that the respite was fleeting. For as long as there were dragons beyond the sea, the realm would never sleep soundly. As for Tywin Lannister, his fate dangled on the precipice of a trial, overshadowed by the greater question. Would Valyrian flames soon leap across the narrow sea, plunging all into a new war? At least for now, Westeros stood together, forging a united front against an uncertain dawn. In the stillness of that unity, they found the faintest glimmer of hope. And hope, in a land so often ravaged by ambition and bloodshed, was the rarest treasure of all. The Red Priests called them sermons of revelation, gatherings in secret squares and on street corners where flames rose high in braziers, drawing the desperate and the curious alike. Their voices, fervent and full of portent, carried through King's Landing in the hush before the dawn, in the bustle of midday, and as the dusk settled over narrow lanes. They wore robes of deep crimson, embroidered with the blazing heart of R'hllor, and carried staffs crowned with living fire. Wherever they passed, whispers followed. The new age is upon us, the dawn of a new Valyria, dragons and a true Valyrian empire to reshape the world. Little by little, these pronouncements took on weight, a magnetism that drew hopeful and fearful souls alike. For many in the capital, still reeling from the weight of old wars and recent unrest, these sermons offered both wonder and dread. The faithful clustered, listening raptly as the Red Priests proclaimed that the Lord of Light had ordained a great cleansing. The name of Varos crept into their sermons, a sorcerer touched by the fire itself, and Daenerys Targaryen, the Queen of Dragons, whose reign in Essos threatened to cast a long shadow across the narrow sea. The priests, their voices rising above the crackle of flame, claimed that the old ways were dying, and the new would soon burn away all that was rotten, forging a realm that bowed neither to old blood nor ancient crowns. A new Valyria, they insisted, more glorious than the empire that once was, blessed by Lawler to endure until the end of ages. It did not take long for word of these sermons to reach ears in the Red Keep. Throughout King's Landing, gold cloaks reported sightings of gatherings at odd hours. At first, the king's men tried to disperse them, but the crowds were large, and the Red Priests rarely broke any laws beyond stirring hearts to zeal. For the moment, they were allowed to speak so long as they did not provoke open rebellion. Yet, the tension around these events was palpable. People whispered that the new priests only heralded the unstoppable tide, that Varys and Daenerys would eventually come west, and the Lord of Light's red-robed servants meant to prepare the ground. Thus it came as no surprise when King Robert Baratheon, after hearing a particularly incendiary report of a sermon near Flea Bottom, summoned his entire small council to convene in the austere council chamber at the heart of the keep. The hour was late, but the matter brooked no delay. Torches burned brightly along the walls, shadows dancing across faces grim with apprehension. At the long table, Ned Stark sat close to the king's seat, the old parchment from the city watch in front of him. Lords and knights filled the seats. Stannis Baratheon returned from his journey to Braavos with uneasy tidings of precarious financial accords. Renly Baratheon trying to maintain a veneer of optimism, and a host of other key advisors. Robert himself stood at the head of the chamber, Warhammer leaning against the tall chair that served as a subtle reminder of his triumph in the rebellion of old. His face was flushed, whether from anger or wine or both. He ran a hand through his hair and then smacked the top of the chair with an open palm. First, these Red Priests appear on every corner, preaching dooms and destinies we never asked for. Now I hear they have crowds in the hundreds, chanting about a new Valyria, about dragons and conquest. By the gods, I thought we were done with Targaryen nonsense. Ned inclined his head, meeting Robert's eyes with that calm sense of duty he always carried. We have tried to monitor them. They do not openly incite rebellion against the crown, yet they speak of a grand design that surpasses mortal politics, a design that, they claim, only Varys can fulfill. Stannis, hands pressed together on the table, his jaw set in that familiar, uncompromising way, spoke. This talk of new Valyria is dangerous. It's not just another band of religious fanatics. They connect these sermons to Varys and Daenerys. That implies organization. Perhaps these priests are in direct contact with Essos, sowing the seeds of loyalty before any invasion. Renly, ever playing the conciliatory role, let out a soft sigh. The faith of the Seven is the dominant religion here, not this Lord of Light. Most of the small folk won't lightly abandon their old gods. But if these Red Priests promise salvation or victory, some might be swayed. War and uncertainty make people cling to any hope. Robert leaned forward on the table, face tightening. We can't have them stirring trouble in my city. We've enough on our hands with Tywin in the dungeons, Kevin on his way to parley, and the threat from Essos looming. I want them kept in check. Arrest any who openly call for rebellion or claim the crown is illegitimate. Let them talk of gods if they must, but not at the cost of my authority. Ned spoke, voice subdued but firm. We must be cautious. Publicly persecuting these priests might only lend credence to their message. They'll become martyrs. Better we watch them quietly, see who attends their sermons, gather intelligence. Stannis's mouth pressed into a thin line. Intelligence only matters if we act on it. If they're planting seeds of faith in this so-called new Valyria, it could spread faster than we can uproot it. We cannot underestimate the appeal of dragons returning to free the masses from the old wheel of lords. And I suspect they tie these ideas into Varos's claims of a divine cleansing. Robert's grip on the table edge tightened. This talk of cleansing, of a new age, it chills my blood. I remember how Rhaegar Targaryen was once called noble. Look what that Targaryen line brought. Death, madness. Now these fools want to replicate that on an even grander scale with a sorcerer at their side. Seven save us all if they cross the sea. Renly spoke up, shifting in his seat. Your Grace, they might not cross the sea so quickly. They've Yunkai and Meereen to conquer, not to mention the rest of Slaver's Bay. Our ravens from the east confirm that Varos is traveling to Old Valyria to awaken more dragons. If rumors are correct, that might take time. At that last statement, the chamber grew still, tension thick as smoke. Stannis cleared his throat. We must use that time well. We have the funds from Bravos to bolster our naval defenses and keep our armies present. The Westerlands remain quiet. Tywin's captivity all but forces their submission, and Kevin has pledged to come for negotiations. Ned placed a letter on the table, a fresh one from the City Watch. According to the Watch Commander, these Red Priests preach daily, in different quarters of the city, but never in the same spot twice. Their doctrine is straightforward. The world stands on the cusp of an era, overshadowed by the return of dragons and the old Valyrian might. They do not yet demand violence, but they foresee a purging of wickedness and a forging of a new empire in flames. Robert's gaze roamed around the faces of his council. An empire they mean to start in Essos, no doubt, with Daenerys calling herself a queen and Varos proclaiming his divine visions. If these priests spread the notion that Westeros too must bow, we'll have a panic on our hands. People will suspect we're powerless before dragons and magic. Renly drummed his fingers on the table in a restless pattern. So how do we respond? If we ignore them, they grow bolder. If we crack down, we risk feeding their martyr narrative. Ned took a breath, the lines of worry deepening on his face. We continue to watch. We quell any calls for immediate rebellion. We reaffirm the crown's strength through displays of unity and power. Our men must remain disciplined. No brutality that might confirm the priest's claims that the old world is corrupt. Let us also keep our alliances intact. Tyrell, Tully, Aaron, Martell, though we must not mention certain matters that might incite old wounds. The realm must remain a fortress, unassailable from within. Stannis agreed with a curt nod. I will see that the navy remains vigilant in the narrow sea. If any fleet from Essos approaches, we shall have warning. Meanwhile, the lords can remain in position here or close by, ready to respond. Robert offered a grunt of approval. Yes, do that. And the second we see any sign that these priests cross a line, like urging an uprising or openly supporting Varos's dominion over Westeros, they're to be arrested. The small folk can pray to whatever god they want, but I won't tolerate calls to overthrow the realm. A knock at the chamber door interrupted them. One of the gold cloaks entered, saluting. Your Grace, he said, voice cautious. There's news from the docks. A Bravosi ship arrived bearing a letter from the Sea Lord. He seeks an assurance that King's Landing will not hamper Bravosi trade if tensions with Essos escalate. Robert flung a hand dismissively. More damn politics. Fine, we'll craft a response offering trade assurances, so long as Bravos remains neutral. Ned managed a slight smile at the guard. Thank you. We'll address it soon. Dismissed. The guard departed, leaving the council in tense reflection. It was clear that the entire known world braced for the next move. The East stirred with prophecy and might. The West braced with unity and uneasy alliances. And in the heart of it all, these Lord of Light priests preached the dawn of a new Valyria, lighting small fires of belief that threatened to become a blaze none could control. Robert stood, arms folded across his broad chest, gaze hard as iron. This cannot go on forever. If Daenerys means to claim the realm, and Varos claims the Lord of Light has chosen them, they might force our hand. We should prepare letters to each major house, reminding them of their fealty. Keep them at the ready, in case we need their swords if war comes from across the sea. Ned nodded, collecting his notes. Agreed. We'll also respond to Bravos promptly, and we'll continue to track the movements of these Red Priests in the city. There can be no illusions about who holds power here. Stannis shifted, his expression stern. I'll oversee the Navy's maneuvers. If a single ship sails under the banners of Varos or Targaryen near our shores, we'll be ready. Renly mustered his bright, princely smile, though it did little to lighten the somber mood. And I'll see to the lords in attendance, keep them from bickering among themselves. The last thing we need is petty feuds weakening the realm. Robert let out a weary sigh. Then we're settled. Keep me informed daily. If any new threat arises, I want to know before it sets foot on our docks. This is our kingdom to protect. A new Valyria be damned. They adjourned, each man burdened with duty. As they exited the council chamber, the faint echo of chanting drifted through the corridors. A distant prayer to the Lord of Light, or the solemn vow of a red priest, proclaiming that the new age drew near. It was a haunting reminder that while Westeros might stand as one for now, the seeds of change were already sown. In the evening gloom, flickering torches and weary guards guided Ned Stark through the passageways of the Red Keep. The memory of the council weighed on his mind. He thought of the White Walkers, once the greatest threat, now vanquished, and how he had hoped for peace afterward. But the realm always found new perils. The mention of a grand Valyrian empire felt almost unreal. Yet here it was looming, drawn from the minds of the devout and the ruthless. He paused by a balcony overlooking the city. Far below, the lights of King's Landing glimmered. Beyond them lay the sea, dark and mysterious, behind which lay Essos, where Daenerys Targaryen, Varos, and the flames of prophecy gathered. The notion that their power might surpass even the dragons of old made Ned's heart clench. Yet he held onto the thought that unity in Westeros was stronger now than it had been in decades. The lords, though stubborn, recognized the danger. They would fight if forced, and they had Robert's will, Stannis' caution, and perhaps even Renly's charm to guide them. The next morning, with the sun cutting through the dawn mist, Ned found a fresh missive placed by his door. It was from his agents among the city's network, summarizing the late-night sermon of a prominent Red priest. The priest had claimed that when the dragons emerged from Old Valyria, the world would tremble. He spoke of signs in the stars, portents in the flames, and a wave of unstoppable power that would unite the known lands. The crowd, large and awed, chanted prayers of R'hllor, praising Varos as a chosen vessel. Ned read the parchment carefully. The sermon also mentioned Targaryen lineage, stirring some in the crowd to shout for the Queen of the East, Daenerys. Soldiers of the Watch had stood by but did not intervene, as no direct call to rebellion was made against the crown. Yet the tone was unmistakable. The new age was coming, and the priests believed it unstoppable. Later that day, Ned met Robert in the same solar as before, presenting the parchment. Robert read it, his face flushing with anger. It's as we feared. They're rallying hearts to her cause, telling the people that we're just another turn of the old wheel, and that only this new Valyria can free them from the shackles. Ned replied quietly, "We'll do what we must. For now, we watch. If they cross the line and incite direct revolt, we move against them." Robert set the parchment aside with a huff. "And hope we're not too late. If enough people believe in that nonsense, we could have a riot or worse." As the day progressed, the small council reconvened, each member newly aware of the fragile state of things. The difference from the previous day was a resolution to send more undercover watchmen to the sermons, to gather the names of leading Red priests, and to identify any link they might have to the east. If any letter or token from Varos or Daenerys arrived in the priests' hands, they wanted to intercept it. Stannis, stoic as ever, commented that Braavos has recognized the precariousness of the situation, so we have some leverage with the Iron Bank. Yet, if Daenerys obtains their favor or if the Red priests stoke the Free City's fear of Westeros, it might turn quickly. Meanwhile, the realm awaited news of Kevan Lannister's arrival, expecting him to come soon to formalize the date for Tywin's trial. Robert mused aloud that if Kevan arrived safely and the West remained calm, perhaps they could devote more resources to snuffing out these Red priests' network of support. In the late evening, while strolling through a courtyard of the keep, Ned found a pocket of quiet to reflect on the precariousness of every decision. The White Walkers were gone, but a new threat, no less apocalyptic, rose in the east. The so-called true Valyrian Empire threatened to overshadow the old alliances. The Red priests claimed it was a divine crusade, not a mere conquest, rendering it immune to typical political negotiations. How did one negotiate with zeal, with prophecy, with beliefs so absolute they encompassed the entire world's destiny? A soft breeze carried the scent of the sea from Blackwater Bay. Ned breathed deeply, trying to calm himself. He thought of Jon, somewhere across that bay, far beyond the horizon. Had Jon chosen a side in this new world? Was he still simply trying to do right as he always had? If only the letter Ned sent would yield some response, some clarity. But the gods rarely gave clarity freely. Elsewhere in the Red Keep, Robert drank and brooded, balancing the need to remain vigilant with a longing for simpler days. Stannis and Renly worked to keep lords loyal, to manage supplies, to reorder the realm's finances in anticipation of war. The Gold Cloaks patrolled the streets, sometimes dispersing small gatherings of red priests, other times only observing as the sermons concluded. For the moment, the priests seemed content with their rousing orations, not calling for open revolt. But all understood it was only a matter of time. The day would come when those fiery preachers declared that Westeros must kneel before the new Valyria or burn. Until then, the Crown played a waiting game, forging alliances, raising funds, and building an intelligence network that might at least warn them in time to mount a defense. One evening, Ned sat in his rooms, penning notes to each great house. Aeron, Tully, Tyrell, Greyjoy, still leaderless after Euron's fall, but lesser captains lingered, and even the edges of Martell territory. He asked them all to report any unusual ships, any rumors of dragons or dark sorceries crossing the sea. He urged them to remain vigilant for silver-haired pretenders and their allies. Each letter contained a subtle reminder of the White Walker threat they had vanquished with unity, implying they must stand as one again. Robert, upon reading Ned's final drafts, nodded approval. "It's a good measure, Ned. We can't let them be caught unprepared. If Varos truly harnesses more dragons from the ruins of old Valyria, 7 help us if we face them alone." Stannis also expressed support. "The Navy will watch the seas, but each coastline must be ready to light the beacons if a strange armada appears." Thus, ravens flew by night, bearing the Crown's firm words of caution to every corner of Westeros. Ser Loras Tyrell, impressed by the thoroughness, quipped that it felt reminiscent of the war councils during the time of the White Walker crisis. This time, though, the enemy was not undead but living, breathing men armed with faith and dragons. Days turned into weeks. Rumors of small expansions in Slaver's Bay filtered in. Yunkai had surrendered with minimal bloodshed, thereby augmenting Daenerys' numbers significantly. The talk of a major siege at Meereen loomed. The priests in King's Landing continued their open-air sermons, chanting about how the Lord of Light's chosen would shatter old chains, forging a continent-spanning empire. Each sermon bristled with the implied condemnation of Westeros' system of lords and kings. At last, a dispatch arrived from Kevan Lannister confirming his imminent departure for King's Landing in the following fortnight. He would bring a retinue of 100 men, enough to ensure his safety but not to provoke the Crown. Tywin's trial, delayed so long, now appeared close at hand. The final obstacle to uniting Westeros under one banner, at least in theory, might soon be resolved. Robert viewed this as a chance to remove one more threat from within. Once Tywin's fate is settled, Kevan either swears fealty wholeheartedly, or we deal with them as enemies. If they bend, we secure the West fully. Then all eyes turn east, where dragons roost. Ned, reading a fresh report that the Red Priests near the Dragon Pit had grown bolder, insisted on caution. The priests speak of the Targaryen claim as inevitable. If we show weakness in our dealings with Tywin, they'll say we're fracturing. We must present strength and justice, not vengeance. And so the Crown prepared for the arrival of Kevan Lannister, hoping that by resolving old wounds, they could stand firmer against whatever storms threatened from Essos. Over the city, the voices of the priests grew ever more confident, proclaiming that the new Valyria's dawn would wash away all lesser claims to rule. The small folk, caught between fear and wonder, listened but did not yet rebel. Gold cloaks and watchers waited in every alley, vigilant for the moment the sermons might tip from fiery words to open uprising. On the day Kevan's envoy was expected, a hush fell over King's Landing. Soldiers manned the gates, the gold cloaks alert, scanning every face for signs of treachery. In the Red Keep, Robert and Ned, accompanied by the small council, prepared to greet Kevin in the throne room. The plan was to finalize a date for Tywin's trial and ensure the West declared unwavering loyalty to the crown. Somewhere in the city, a red priest raised a staff crowned with living flames, chanting in a fervent voice about the coming dawn, about the unstoppable tide that would reshape the known world. A small crowd listened, rapt, and overhead, ravens flocked, carrying letters from the crown or from foreign coasts, each one a tiny harbinger of the fate soon to unfold. In the quiet corners of the keep, Ned Stark silently prayed the precarious peace would hold, that Kevin would yield for Tywin's sake, and that the realm might face the next storm without tearing itself apart in the process. But the priest's proclamations echoed in his mind, a reminder that while men wrangled over old disputes, a new order might rise on the back of dragons and prophecy. The future teetered on a knife's edge, awaiting the next move in a game older and far more dangerous than even the White Walker's threat. No matter how diligently the crown prepared, no matter how many alliances they secured, no matter how many ravens flew, the whispers of fire and light grew louder. The world, as many began to suspect, might never be the same. The priests of the Lord of Light insisted it was destiny, and that destiny was coming swiftly, carried on dragon wings. Daenerys stood upon the high terrace of the great palace in Astapor, a place that had once been the seat of brutal slavers, now transformed into a headquarters of sorts for her expanding forces. The air was heavy with desert heat, yet a constant breeze drifted in from Slaver's Bay, carrying scents of salt and spice through the open windows. She wore a simple yet elegant gown of pale blue, her silver gold hair braided back in a style both practical and regal. At her side stood a pair of unsullied guards, silent and stoic as they awaited any command from their queen. Over the last few days, Astapor had begun to take on the trappings of a larger war camp, the original city no longer merely a liberated settlement but a staging ground for something far grander. Part of Daenerys felt satisfaction at the progress. Her dream of freeing slaves and punishing cruel masters was coming to fruition with each passing hour. But another part of her was restless, uneasy about the scale of what was soon to unfold. She gazed out over the city's skyline. Sun-baked walls, clusters of mud-brick houses, and spires that caught the golden light of morning. It was a city in transition, marbled with new chaos and new order, the free men and women attempting to build something better even as the old scars of slavery lingered. From her vantage, Daenerys could also see the Bayside docks, bustling with new activity as a flotilla of war galleys and troop transports arrived day after day. Many bore the sigils of the newly forged Valyrian freehold, a draconic symbol that marked them as belonging to Varos's forces, so reminiscent of ancient times that even she found herself quietly awed. This morning, she'd been told by her advisors to expect Varos's return from Old Valyria. Rumors abounded that he had gone to commune with the spirits of the past, the Lord of Light, and the very essence of the lost empire that once ruled half the known world. She had steeled herself for what that might entail. Varos was powerful, cunning, and driven by visions Daenerys sometimes struggled to grasp. They had forged an alliance, each using the other's strengths to unify Slaver's Bay and force the masters of Yunkai and Meereen to bend. Yet Daenerys could not shake a kernel of concern that Varos's ambitions went far beyond even her own. The Lord of Light, according to him, had sanctioned a grand cleansing, a forging of an empire that would surpass Old Valyria. Part of her embraced that vision with fervor, ending slavery forever, breaking the cycle of injustice that had defined Essos for centuries. And yet, the older she grew, the more she realized that absolute power demanded absolute caution. Suddenly, there came a thunderous roar in the distance, so deep that it reverberated within her chest. Daenerys's heart lurched. She recognized that roar. Maelstrom, the largest dragon she had ever seen, far bigger than her own trio combined. The unsullied guards at her side lifted their spears as if in reflex, scanning the skies. Daenerys moved to the edge of the terrace, shielding her eyes against the morning sun, and saw a colossal shape descending through the haze of dawn. Maelstrom's black and red scales glimmered like volcanic glass, the heat distortion rippling around the beast as it soared nearer. And then she saw that Varos was not alone. All around Maelstrom, Dozens of dragons in flight formed a living storm of wings and flame, each a testament to the untapped might of old Valyria that even Daenerys had not fully believed possible. Her breath caught in her throat as the flock approached. It was a sight to rival legends, more grand and terrible than any dragon flight known in living memory. She counted the silhouettes hastily, 8, 10, 20 more, until the shapes blurred into a swirl of leathery wings blotting out the sun. The city of Astapor seemed to gasp collectively. She heard distant cries of shock and awe rising from the streets. Slaves turned freemen, merchants, soldiers, the newly arrived Dothraki all turned their faces skyward. Even Daenerys' own dragons, Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion, reacted with uneasy roars from their makeshift pens. They sensed the arrival of kin, but these were not the docile hatchlings that had grown under her care. They were older, fiercer, and commanded by a force more ancient than any living Targaryen. Amid the spectacle, a second surprise manifested on the horizon. A fleet so large it spanned the length of the bay. Dozens of war galleys, troop transports, supply vessels, and more. Their sails were dyed crimson and black, carrying the sigil of the new Valyrian freehold. Even from this distance, Daenerys estimated at least 100 ships, possibly more. Astapor's harbor, never meant for such a massive influx, would be overwhelmed. She realized, with a sudden jolt, that the 50,000 men Varos had once displayed at Winterfell was merely a token. The full might of Valyria was here now, forging a scale of force that dwarfed anything Daenerys had envisioned. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. As Daenerys stepped back from the balustrade, the ground shuddered beneath the impact of Maelstrom landing in the wide courtyard below her terrace. The monstrous dragon folded its wings with a menacing grace. The air filled with heat and the stench of sulfur. An entire garrison of Unsullied formed a perimeter, spears at the ready in case some outbreak of chaos happened, though they all knew none could truly stand before a dragon so immense. Then Varos, draped in robes of deep red and black, dismounted from Maelstrom's broad neck. His fiery gaze swept across the courtyard, taking in the gasps of the watchers, the assembled officers in mild panic or reverence. He raised an arm in a silent command, and the other dragons, those that had circled overhead, began their descent in measured arcs, alighting throughout the city's outskirts or perching on rooftops strong enough to hold them. The cacophony of roars, flapping wings, and the excited shouts of men and women alike mingled in a tumultuous, magnificent moment. From her vantage, Daenerys saw Varos stride forward, his posture exuding triumph. The legion of Valyrian troops disembarking from the newly arrived fleet marched through the city streets in organized ranks, a disciplined tide of armor and banners. Dozens of officers, all wearing matching black plate with red inlays reminiscent of the old Empire's style, began issuing commands. Torches blazed in the daylight as fire priests accompanied some platoons, chanting prayers to R'hllor. The synergy of warriors, priests, and dragons was overwhelming. In that instant, Daenerys realized the world had changed irrevocably. This was not a mere alliance of convenience. This was old Valyria, reborn, standing at her doorstep. She descended quickly with a retinue of Unsullied, her mind racing. She needed to talk to Varos to understand his intentions. The commotion in the courtyard parted for her. Soldiers bowed as she passed, murmuring "Your Grace" in tones of awe. At the center of this maelstrom stood Varos, waiting. As she approached, he offered a faint smile. "Daenerys Stormborn," he said, voice resonant. "I have returned from the ancient cradle of our power, and I have not returned alone." Her heart thundered. "I see that. This force is beyond anything I'd imagined. You said you commanded more dragons, but dozens? And you bring over 100,000 soldiers." Varos inclined his head, the edges of his robe fluttering in the warm breeze. "The half you saw at Winterfell was only a taste of what the Lord of Light has ordained." Old Valyria's embers yet smoldered. The structures of the old empire were not as dead as many believed. With the will of R'hllor and the impetus of prophecy, we have reclaimed them. Daenerys examined the dragons overhead, half wondering if Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion would react violently to this new brood. So many dragons! I had no idea any survived beyond the few we have raised. Yet here they are. This changes everything. Varos's gaze was unreadable. Indeed it does, and we must now consolidate. Yunkai awaits surrender. Meereen still defies us. Once Slaver's Bay is fully under your banner, we will gather the strength to move on the free cities if they resist. Daenerys stiffened, flashes of the old dreams surfacing in her mind. To break the wheel of tyranny, to end slavery. But the scale of this suddenly felt less like a liberation and more like an unstoppable wave of conquest. She recalled the reports from Westeros, how Robert Baratheon's watchers had begun stirring the free cities to caution. Robert is alerting them, Varos. He's sending envoys to Pentos, Bravos, Lys. They'll be wary of us now. He sees you as a threat, sees me as a threat. He might unify Westeros to stand against us if we cross the sea. Varos nodded, as though expecting this. Robert is no fool. He rallied men to defeat the White Walkers, overcame your father's line in the old rebellion. He has cunning and strength. We must not underestimate him. But for now, our eyes remain on Essos. A time may come to face Westeros, or perhaps to treat with them. Lawloress flames have not shown me an inevitable war with the Seven Kingdoms. Not yet. Just then, two figures approached from behind Daenerys. Jon Snow and a Dornish warrior named Oberyn, both of whom had been integral in forging alliances with local forces. They halted at the courtyard's edge, both wearing expressions that betrayed shock. Oberyn's eyes roamed over the array of dragons with an almost hungry fascination, but the stunned nature of his stance said it all. Jon, for his part, looked unsettled, one hand resting on the hilt of his sword as if the presence of so many dragons had set his nerves on edge. This force? Jon began, his voice subdued. How many have come? It looks like more than we can house in any city. Varos allowed a small smile, though it was tinged with something dark. 100,000 troops, or near enough. They have been forging in secret for years, drawn from the hidden enclaves of surviving Valyrian bloodlines, from freed slaves eager to remake the world, from scattered mercenaries enthralled by the might of dragons. And with the Lord of Light's blessing, they are ours to command. Jon's gaze flickered to Daenerys. 100,000. This is more than just another step in freeing Slaver's Bay. Isn't it? Daenerys swallowed, finding her voice. It is. Once we take Yunkai and Meereen, the entire bay will be ours. We'll raise legions from there, unify Essos. If the free cities refuse to end slavery, we may have to fight them. Jon's lips parted as though to protest, but Varos continued before he could speak. Robert is not to be trifled with, he said, echoing Daenerys's worry. He unites the lords of Westeros. They are forging alliances, building a naval force. The Lord of Light's will, however, is that we do not interfere with Westeros unless forced. Our immediate mission remains in Essos. Yet an envoy must be sent to King's Landing to clarify our stance. Oberyn, stepping closer, studied Varos with undisguised intrigue. You propose an envoy, sorcerer? A letter or a mouthpiece that says we do not mean to conquer the Seven Kingdoms. At least not now. Varos inclined his head. Precisely. We shall reassure them we have no desire to topple Robert from his throne. Our crusade is to break the chains in Essos, to restore Valyrian might to the eastern continent. If Westeros leaves us be, we see no reason to war with them. That is the message. Jon studied Varos with guarded eyes, uncertain whether to trust his sincerity. Will they believe it? Robert might see the arrival of your massive fleet and these dragons as a sign of unstoppable aggression. Telling him to stand down might not be enough. Daenerys exhaled sharply, frustration mingling with her sense of purpose. Then we must choose an envoy Robert cannot dismiss. Perhaps someone with ties to Westeros. But who? Not me, obviously. Nor you, Jon, you're too crucial here. We need a neutral figure. Varos lifted a hand. Worry not. I have priests and captains who can speak on our behalf. We simply need to ensure the envoy is well-guarded and persuasive. The free cities might object, but they cannot ignore that, For now, we do not intend to cross the narrow sea." Jon, still reeling from the scale of the new arrivals, exchanged a quick glance with Daenerys. They shared a bond, tenuous but real. The revelation that Jon was of Targaryen blood still hung between them, unspoken yet ever-present. Daenerys felt a twinge of relief that Varos was, if only temporarily, focusing on Essos, not Westeros. She worried about the day their dragons might face Robert's armies. She worried about how that might tear Jon apart if he truly cared for both sides. Oberyn, arms crossed, studied them both. "I suppose it's wise to quell Westeros's fears. War on two fronts is seldom to anyone's advantage. If Robert stands idle while we subdue Essos, we can focus all might on the real obstacles. The slaver lords, the potential alliances among the free cities who might resist us." Varos gave a curt nod, turning to Daenerys with an air of finality. "Summon the scribes. We will draft a formal statement to be carried by an envoy. They will sail for King's Landing within the week. The message: we do not seek conflict with Westeros. We only seek to end the scourge of slavery in Essos. If Robert chooses to hamper us, the old treaties of war may yet be invoked. But we would prefer peace." Daenerys parted her lips, unsure whether to voice her deeper concerns. Yet she pressed on. "That is wise. But Varos, the free cities, especially Myr and Lys, are not known for bending quickly. They might reach out to Robert for mutual defense. Then we have the worst scenario, a coalition bridging the sea." Varos's eyes gleamed with the reflection of some internal fire. "Lawless flames have shown me many possible futures. Some are indeed grim. But it is not written that Westeros and Essos must unite against us. The more likely outcome is that they remain divided, each suspicious of the other. Let us ensure it stays that way." Jon winced slightly. The cold calculus of keeping two continents suspicious of each other did not sit well with him, but he recognized it might be the only path to avoid a broader war. "We'll do it. I just hope it truly prevents a catastrophe." Maelstrom let out a soft rumble behind them, as though echoing the tension in the conversation. Daenerys turned to the giant dragon, still in awe of its colossal form. The thought that Scourge and Maelstrom, or the dozens of other dragons overhead, might one day pass beyond Slaver's Bay toward Westeros filled her with conflicting feelings. The memory of her birthright, the Iron Throne, warred with her distaste for unleashing such destruction on the land that bore her family's name. For now, she reminded herself that her goal was the liberation of slaves, the forging of a new order in Essos. In the subsequent days, the city adapted to the new arrivals. Tents sprang up along Astapor's edges to house the thousands of additional troops. The local markets boomed with activity as merchants profited from the sudden influx of coin. Valyrian officers walked the streets, commanding with silent authority. Fire priests held small ceremonies, chanting prayers in High Valyrian, drawing freedmen to watch in reverent curiosity. The dragons soared overhead, an ever-present reminder that power lay firmly in the hands of this blossoming empire. Daenerys and Varos convened regularly in the palace's grand hall, strategizing how to handle Yunkai's final capitulation. A portion of the newly arrived force would sail upriver or march through desert passes, encircling Meereen. Envoys were sent forth to see if any city lords would surrender without bloodshed. Meanwhile, scribes worked tirelessly drafting that all-important letter for King Robert. Each draft was scrutinized. The language had to convey no threat, only a promise to remain east if left undisturbed. Still, Daenerys insisted they incorporate a note on freeing slaves, an implicit moral stance that might soften potential condemnation. Varos took a more practical approach, reminding the scribes to emphasize that their cause was strictly in Essos, that no Westerosi city need fear them unless they first offered aggression. Jon found himself torn between assisting Daenerys with these new logistical tasks and his own moral reservations. He saw how the throngs of freed slaves praised her as Mysa, while the newly arrived Valyrian troops regarded Varos with almost reverential awe. Once in a while, he'd wander the makeshift dragon pens, checking on Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion. He noticed they had grown restless, reacting to the presence of so many older, larger dragons. He sought to reassure them with calm words and the occasional offering of meat. The old Valyrian caretaker reminded him that dragons recognized kinship by scent and aura, whatever that meant. The caretaker claimed the synergy of multiple dragons would only empower them all. Jon, though uncertain, took solace in that possibility. Oberyn, meanwhile, served as an informal advisor, cautioning Daenerys about the complex politics of the eastern continent. He spoke of how the larger free cities might not take kindly to a new empire overshadowing them. Yunkai and Meereen were only stepping stones, and if the entire region aligned against them, even the might of 100,000 men and dozens of dragons could be tested. Varros listened with half a smile, as though hearing a melody he'd anticipated. He would nod, acknowledging the risk, but repeated that the Lord of Light's flame had shown him victory was assured if they remained steadfast. Finally, the day arrived when a small fleet of swift ships prepared to depart from the bay. On them would travel the envoy Varros and Daenerys had assembled, a contingent of diplomatic scribes, a handful of fire priests to underscore their devotion, and a protective escort of Valyrian soldiers to ensure safe passage. The message was sealed in wax bearing Daenerys's personal sigil of the three-headed dragon, along with Varros's own signet, a stylized flame around a dragon's skull. This letter, if delivered successfully, would reach King's Landing, seeking to quell the tensions roiling between the two continents. Jon and Oberyn stood on a jetty, watching as the final crates of supplies were loaded onto the lead vessel. The water shimmered an odd green near the hull, reflection from the midday sun. They shared a brief exchange of uneasy glances. In just a few short months, the world had leapt from one crisis to another, from undead horrors to the rebirth of Valyria. That these events might intersect with Westeros' centuries-old feuds was an outcome none could predict. Up on a nearby outcropping, Daenerys observed the scene, her mind racing with possibilities. If Robert believed them, tension might ease. If he mistrusted their words, the Seven Kingdoms could unite to strike preemptively. Varros arrived at her side, draped in those familiar crimson and black robes. He gestured at the ships. "Our best chance to avoid war with Robert, for now," Varros said quietly, with a tinge of finality. "If he rejects us or attempts sabotage, Lawlor's designs will shift, and we must be prepared." Daenerys nodded, eyes fixed on the line of ships. "Let us hope he chooses peace. If not, thousands will die, and the realm I was born to govern might see me as a conqueror, not a liberator." She paused, glancing at Varros. "Sometimes I wonder if your visions are shaped by your own desires. Is war truly unavoidable?" Varros's lips curled into an inscrutable smile. "I see many paths, Daenerys Stormborn. Some lead to the forging of a new world without further bloodshed. Others see the old powers cling to their illusions, forcing our hand. We are strong enough to endure either. Let fate decide which way the flames burn." As the ships set sail, carrying the hopes of a fragile non-aggression pact, Astapor roiled with activity. Valyrian officers posted new orders, rallying detachments to advance on Yunkai's gates. The local freedmen looked on with awe and no small measure of relief. Despite the grandeur of dragons, they recognized Daenerys and her new allies were preferable to the cruelty of the old masters. Each day brought them closer to a wholly changed Essos, for better or for worse. In the late afternoon, Jon found himself perched on a high balcony overlooking the city once more, the wind tousling his dark hair. He thought of Ned's letter, which might be arriving at Daenerys' palace any day now. Had his father guessed the scope of what was happening? Did Ned suspect the monstrous scale of the forces now assembled in Astapor? And how would he react if he knew the entire might of old Valyria was rising to overshadow even the greatest armies Westeros could muster? He felt Oberyn's presence at his back, and while the Dornishmen said nothing, Jon could sense a shared realization. The world was pivoting at breakneck speed, and they stood at its turning point. For all his doubts, for all his devotion to the North, Jon realized he had become entangled in this unstoppable current. And deep inside, a flicker of Targaryen heritage glowed, making him wonder if his destiny indeed lay in forging a new order rather than propping up the old. Meanwhile, Varos convened with Daenerys and certain high-ranking Valyrian officers inside the old throne room of Astapor. Fire priests accompanied them, chanting softly in a corner. The topic: finalizing the campaign for Yunkai, preparing for an assault on Meereen if that city refused to capitulate. They spoke of ships blockading harbors, dragons sowing fear in the night sky, and foot soldiers capturing strategic vantage points. Daenerys insisted on a chance to negotiate. She still hated mindless slaughter. Varos nodded, promising that slavers would be given one chance to end their business peacefully. If they refused, the dragons would speak. The synergy of determination filled the room, a silent pact that no chain would remain unbroken. 2 days later, scouts reported that Yunkai's officials had sent envoys, trembling, to treat with Daenerys' legates. The city's new masters apparently recognized the hopelessness of resistance against an armada of dragons. Within a fortnight, Yunkai might be fully in their hands without significant bloodshed. That would further reinforce Daenerys' moral cause. Yet the next step, Meereen, was a fortress much more defiant. In the hush of evening, the city's torches began to glow, and from various corners of Astapor, the swirl of nightly gatherings formed. Freedmen took to small celebrations at taverns, while across the main square, a group of fire priests chanted praises to R'hlloreth's eternal flame. The crescendo of voices, the flickering of shadows, conjured an image of an empire in the making. Overhead, dragons soared as living embodiments of that image. At the palace, Daenerys retired to her chambers, a swirl of conflicting thoughts filling her mind. The unstoppable power of old Valyria at her command, the moral imperative to free slaves, the question of Westeros's reaction, and the quiet tension with Jon, who personified both a tie to her family's lineage and a bridge to the north she barely knew. Varos, standing on a balcony outside his own private quarters, gazed upon the city, listening to the distant prayers of the priests. He thought of the letter soon to reach Robert Baratheon's court. He pictured the scowling king reading it, seeing that, for all the power displayed in Astapor, the official stance was non-aggression. Varos wondered if Robert would believe it. The Lord of Light's visions had not shown him a definite path, only possibilities. If Robert responded with cunning, forging alliances with the free cities to hamper them, war would escalate more swiftly. If he chose caution, preferring to let Essos devour itself, perhaps Varos's designs would come to fruition with minimal interference. The flames had revealed a future thick with smoke, but not entirely without hope. One outcome soared above all others: the inevitable birth of a new Valyrian empire. Whether that empire would one day wash upon the shores of Westeros, the flames did not confirm or deny. In the following weeks, the synergy of 100,000 troops manifested in supply lines, training regimens, and an outpouring of discipline that dwarfed any mercenary host the local lords had ever encountered. The city's forges worked day and night, forging steel shaped in Valyrian designs. Artisans hammered out helmets engraved with stylized dragons. The local freedmen's council found themselves overshadowed by the military apparatus, though Daenerys ensured they retained a voice in civil matters. She wanted to show the world that even with such might, she would not become a tyrant. Meanwhile, more of the newly arrived dragons patrolled the skies, occasionally landing in desert outskirts to feed on wild game. The presence of so many formidable beasts had begun to alter the local ecosystem, driving creatures to flee or else confront their new apex predators. Jon frequently walked among the encampments, attempting to keep morale balanced between excitement and caution. He saw men kneeling in prayer before altars of flame. He saw them forging bonds with local freedmen, exchanging stories of old Valyria or new conquests. The free market outside Astapor's gates flourished with foreign merchants hoping to profit from the sudden wealth saturating the region. He recognized that, in many ways, this was a glimpse of the world's new shape, a melding of faith, force, and commerce under a banner that promised deliverance from old injustices. Oberyn, for his part, took an active interest in the martial readiness of the new arrivals. He moved from one training field to another, speaking with officers, learning their doctrines. He occasionally sparred with notable swordsmen, testing them. The cunning set of his jaw suggested he was still deciding whether Varos's crusade was worth every drop of blood that might be shed. Despite that, he exuded a certain enthusiasm for the velocity of change. Westeros had grown stagnant in the eyes of men like Oberyn. Here, in the blazing furnace of Valyrian revival, the world was forging a new identity. Late one evening, Daenerys called a private meeting in the palace's council chamber. Varos, Jon, Oberyn, a few high-ranking Valyrian captains, and some of her own trusted advisors, Ser Jorah Mormont among them, attended. The letter to King's Landing had sailed, but no response would come swiftly. Meanwhile, scouts informed them that Yunkai was days away from surrender, while Meereen's lords had begun reinforcing their walls. Daenerys pressed them for details about how best to handle the siege if Meereen refused diplomacy. Fire priests insisted the dragons were enough to break any fortress. Others advised a naval blockade, starving the city. Varos listened to all, offering occasional remarks on the cunning of city-states that had endured centuries of war under the Giscari legacy. Jon, though less experienced in associate warfare, added that senseless slaughter could drive potential allies into an anti-Valyrian alliance. "We should be firm but not cruel," he argued, eyeing Varos with a subtle challenge. "Any city that refuses can see what power we wield without us burning their innocence wholesale." Daenerys nodded in agreement, mindful that her own moral code demanded more than raw intimidation. "We must remain the liberators, not the new slavers. That's the heart of my cause, or it means nothing." She glanced at Varos, who gave a slight dip of his head, apparently accepting her stance. Oberyn, leaning against a pillar, looked thoughtful. He kept his counsel to himself. Before the meeting ended, Varos raised the subject of Westeros again. The envoy was en route with a message of peace. If Robert accepted it, the realm might remain neutral or even covertly supportive, so long as the new Valyrian Empire confined itself to Essos. If Robert rejected or distrusted the message, it might provoke him to rally the free cities in a grand coalition. The future hinged on a handful of letters and the fortunes of men with strong tempers. As the room cleared, leaving only Daenerys, Jon, and Varos, the tension grew. Daenerys parted her lips, a question in her eyes, but Varos spoke first. "You both hold concerns for Westeros. Don't forget, the Lord of Light's design is not to enslave the Seven Kingdoms. We do not wish to repeat the madness of the Mad King. We want to end the wheel of suffering in Essos, to unify it under a single flame of righteousness." Jon mulled over those words, his brow furrowed. "And if one day that wheel of suffering rears its head in Westeros? If Robert stands against you simply out of fear?" Varos's fiery gaze flicked to Daenerys. "Then we weigh the cost. War is never a first choice, but this is not about personal grudges. It's about forging an age where dragons and men shape destiny without the old shackles. Lawlor's flame guides us." Daenerys, though uncertain, inclined her head. "We'll see how Robert responds. If he attacks us or shields the slavers, we'll have no choice but to treat Westeros as an enemy. If he stays his hand, there can be peace." In that moment, the vow was unspoken yet clear. A final attempt at avoiding another cataclysmic war with Westeros. The next days turned into a haze of logistics, as ships from the new fleet docked to offload thousands of soldiers, provisions, siege engines. The streets of Astapor spilled over with equipment for the approaching campaign. The night sky often lit with dragons practicing aerial maneuvers, their roars echoing across the desert. Freed slaves watched from windows, children squealing in awe or fear. Slaver spies, if any remained, dared not reveal themselves in a city brimming with unstoppable might. Meanwhile, the priests of the Lord of Light amplified their sermons in Astapor's public squares, extolling the dawn of a new Valyria. They spoke of destiny more forcefully than ever, proclaiming that soon Yunkai would bend, followed by Meereen. Then, if the free cities proved obstinate, the dragons would bring them to heel. Yet each time, Varos or Daenerys or one of their key advisors reminded the crowd that Westeros lay beyond their scope for now. Some priests nodded in agreement. Others, evidently more zealous, whispered that the Seven Kingdoms needed cleansing too. That tension simmered under the surface, a subtle rift among the faithful. Was the new Valyria destined to span the entire known world, or merely Essos? In conversation with Daenerys one evening, Jon expressed worry that these priests might become a liability. They stir passions, claim to see the future in flames. What if they decide Westeros must burn? Will Varos overrule them? Daenerys exhaled slowly. Varos is their spiritual guide in many ways, but he also has a pragmatic side. I believe he truly wants to avoid conflict with Robert for the time being. Let us pray that remains so. Jon nodded, though uneasy. That night, he gazed upon the 3 dragons he had helped raise with Daenerys, Drogon, Rhaegal, Viserion, quietly wishing for a simpler fate, one not bound up in cosmic prophecies or the forging of empires. If only the path forward were that simple. A fortnight after Varos's triumphant arrival with the massive fleet, news came that Yunkai's ruling council had formally surrendered, agreeing to free all remaining slaves and cede governance to Daenerys's appointed Freedmen's Council. A few rogue masters had tried to rally, but faced with the monstrous presence of multiple dragons overhead, they capitulated almost immediately. The banners of Old Valyria and the 3-headed dragon of Daenerys flew from Yunkai's outer walls, signifying yet another city claimed. The entire Slaver's Bay now contained only one major stronghold that resisted, Meereen. At the same time, scouts reported that no official response had arrived yet from King's Landing. The envoy must still be en route. Varos, hearing this, displayed calm acceptance. The sea is wide, and the winds unpredictable. We will hear from Robert soon enough, I wager. Meanwhile, we proceed with our plan. And so Meereen lay next on their horizon. A city with high walls, a proud tradition, and a population much larger than Astapor or Yunkai combined. The tension soared, for a direct siege would be the largest military engagement Daenerys had ever attempted, perhaps overshadowing even some of the old Targaryen conquests. But with Varos's reinforcements, with dozens of dragons, with 100,000 disciplined troops, it seemed